moving. Hands behind your back.
I'm not
Stay still. Hey,
I'm not resisting that arm.
stop twisting. There you go.
All right.
What's going on? Don't move.
I'm not moving.
Second one. Locked. Okay.
Agent Marcus Reynolds adjusted his dark sunglasses, even though he was indoors. The air conditioning in the lobby of the Atlanta VA Medical Center hummed with a low, persistent drone, a sound Reynolds associated with waiting. He wasn't good at waiting. He was a man of action, an 11-year veteran of immigration and customs enforcement who prided himself on his ability to spot a lie from across the room. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was the tip line again. 8:15 a.m. The anonymous caller, a scratchy male voice that sounded like it was coming from a payphone, had been insistent. "There's a man," the voice had said. "Old guy, black, using a fake ID to steal benefits. He's at the VA right now. Don't let him get away." Reynolds didn't ask for a name. He didn't ask for details. He didn't log into the federal database to cross-reference patient records. He simply grabbed his partner, Agent Sarah Mitchell, and headed out the door. In his mind, the mission was clear. Protect the integrity of the system. Protect the resources meant for real Americans. But as he walked across the polished linoleum floor of the waiting room, his boots clicking with authority, Reynolds was walking toward a precipice. He was about to confront a man who had faced down enemy machine guns before Reynolds' parents had even met. He was about to turn a quiet Thursday morning into a national referendum on race service and the dangerous arrogance of power. Before we dive into the details of this shocking confrontation, I want to ask you a question. Where are you listening from today? We have a global community here, and I always love seeing where justice is being watched. And if you're new here, welcome. We tell the stories the news often misses. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss an update. The man in the wheelchair was named Thomas Tommy Jefferson. He was 89 years old. He wore a faded navy blue cap embroidered with the words Korean War Veteran in gold thread. His hands, gnarled by arthritis and decades of hard work, rested on the armrests of his chair. He was reading a copy of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. Thomas had been born in 1935 in a small town outside of Montgomery, Alabama. He was the son of a mechanic and a housekeeper. He grew up in a world where the laws told him where he could sit, where he could drink, and who he could be. But Thomas had never accepted those limits. In 1953, at the age of 18, he had enlisted in the U.S. Army. He wanted to see the world. He wanted to serve. He got his wish, though it came with a heavy price. He was deployed to the Korean Peninsula, thrown into the meat grinder of a conflict that history books would later call the Forgotten War. But Thomas didn't forget. He remembered the cold that froze the breath in his lungs. He remembered the sound of mortars whistling in the dark. He remembered the day his platoon was pinned down near the Chosin Reservoir, and he had dragged 2 wounded men, one white, one black, to safety, while shrapnel tore into his right thigh. That shrapnel was still there, a permanent souvenir of his patriotism. It was the reason he was in a wheelchair today. It was the reason he had a Purple Heart stored in a velvet box on his mantle. It was the reason he had a Bronze Star for Valor hanging in his hallway. Thomas Jefferson had served 24 years in the Army. He had retired as a Master Sergeant. Then he had spent another 28 years working for the U.S. Postal Service, delivering mail in rain, sleet, and snow. He had paid his dues. He had paid his taxes. He had paid in blood. But Agent Reynolds didn't see any of that. As he scanned the waiting room, his eyes slid past the white veterans chatting in the corner. They slid past the young Hispanic man on crutches. They locked on to Thomas Jefferson. Reynolds saw an elderly black man. He saw a vulnerability, and because of the poison of implicit bias that he had never bothered to examine, he saw a suspect. Reynolds signaled to Mitchell. "That's him," he whispered. "Are you sure?" Mitchell asked. She was younger, newer to the force, and she felt a prickle of unease. "We didn't get a name, Marcus. Maybe we should check with the front desk." "No time," Reynolds said, his voice clipped. "If he sees us talking to the staff, he might bolt." "Bolt?" Mitchell looked at the wheelchair. "He's 89, Marcus." "Fraudsters are crafty," Reynolds said, dismissing her concern. "Let's go." They activated their body cameras. The red lights blinked on, silent witnesses to the disaster that was about to unfold. The approach was swift. Reynolds didn't walk like a public servant. He walked like a predator. He cut through the quiet murmur of the waiting room, his shadow falling across Thomas's newspaper. Thomas looked up. He didn't look scared. He looked annoyed. He was in the middle of the sports section. "Can I help you, son?" Thomas asked. His voice was deep, raspy, the voice of a man who had shouted orders over the roar of artillery. "I need to see your identification and proof of citizenship," Reynolds announced. He didn't say hello. He didn't introduce himself. He just issued a demand. Thomas blinked. He slowly folded his newspaper. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Reynolds said, stepping closer, invading the old man's personal space. "We have reason to believe you are in the country illegally and accessing benefits you aren't entitled to. I need to see your papers." Thomas stared at him. For a moment, the lobby of the VA hospital faded away, and Thomas was back in 1950s Alabama. He remembered the sheriff deputies who used to stop him on his way to school, demanding to know where he was going, demanding to know if he belonged. He had thought those days were over. He had thought the uniform he wore for 2 decades had bought him the right to be left alone. "I am a patient here," Thomas said, his voice steady but cold. "I have been a patient here since 1978. I am a retired master sergeant in the United States Army." "Anyone can buy a hat," Reynolds sneered, gesturing to the veteran cap. "That doesn't prove anything. Let me see your ID." Thomas reached into his shirt pocket. His movements were slow, deliberate. He pulled out his wallet. He extracted his blue VA health identification card. He extracted his Georgia driver's license. He held them up. Mitchell's body camera captured the documents clearly. Thomas Jefferson. The photo matched. The expiration dates were valid. "Here," Thomas said. "Now step away from me." Reynolds barely looked at the cards. He was too far down the path of aggression to turn back now. To accept the ID would be to admit he was wrong, and Marcus Reynolds did not like being wrong. "These could be forged," Reynolds said. "We see high-quality fakes all the time. I'm going to need you to come with us to the field office for biometric verification." The air in the waiting room changed. The other veterans had stopped talking. They were watching. A man in the corner, a Vietnam vet named Frank, stood up. He leaned on his cane. "Hey," Frank shouted. "What the hell are you doing?" "That's Tommy. He's been coming here longer than you've been alive." Reynolds spun around. "Sir, sit down. This is a federal investigation. Do not interfere." "Investigation," Frank spat. "You're harassing a war hero. Look at his hat, you idiot. He fought in Korea." "Sit down," Reynolds barked, his hand dropping to his belt. Thomas looked at the young agent. He saw the fear behind the bluster. He saw a man who was terrified of losing control. "Officer," Thomas said quietly, "you are making a mistake, a very expensive mistake. I served 24 years. I have a Bronze Star. I have a Purple Heart. You are not going to take me anywhere." "I am giving you a lawful order," Reynolds said, his face flushing red. "Stand up." "I cannot stand without assistance," Thomas said. "I have shrapnel in my leg from a Chinese grenade. You want to see the scar?" "I want you in cuffs," Reynolds said. He pulled out his handcuffs. The metal rattled in the silence. "If you won't come voluntarily, you're under arrest for obstruction and suspected fraud." "Arrest," Mitchell whispered. "Marcus, wait. The nurse is coming." Indeed, the head nurse, a formidable woman named Clara, was power-walking across the lobby. "Agent, stop right there," she yelled. "Mr. Jefferson is a patient. I have his file right here." "Not now," Reynolds shouted. He reached for Thomas's wrist. Thomas didn't pull away. He didn't fight. He knew better. He knew that any resistance would be used as an excuse for violence. He simply held out his hands. "Go ahead," Thomas said softly. "Put them on. But remember this moment, son, because it's going to cost you everything." Reynolds snapped the cuffs on. The sound, click, click, echoed like a gunshot. He grabbed the handles of the wheelchair. "Let's go," he told Mitchell. They wheeled Thomas Jefferson out of the VA hospital, past the rows of staring veterans, past the furious nurse, past the security cameras that were recording every second of the disgrace. Thomas held his head high. He didn't look like a criminal. He looked like a king being led to the scaffold by a peasant. The ride to the detention center was silent. Reynolds drove with white-knuckled intensity. Mitchell sat in the back with Thomas looking out the window, unable to meet the old man's eyes. Thomas broke the silence only once. "My service number," he said to the air, "is RA1556920. I enlisted June 12th, 1953. I was honorably discharged August 14th, 1977. Mitchell's camera picked up the audio perfectly. Reynolds turned up the radio to drown him out. When they arrived at the processing center, Reynolds was riding high on adrenaline. He wheeled Thomas to the intake desk. The officer on duty, Sergeant Dave Wilson, looked up from his computer. He looked at the old man in the wheelchair. He looked at the Korean war hat. He looked at Reynolds. "What do you have, Marcus?" Wilson asked, his brow furrowing. "Suspected benefits fraud," Reynolds said. "Tip line said he's undocumented using a fake identity. Refused to cooperate at the scene." Wilson looked at Thomas. "Name?" "Thomas Jefferson," the old man said. Wilson typed the name into the federal database. He hit enter. He waited. His eyes widened. He hit enter again. He scrolled down. He looked at the screen, then at Reynolds. then back at the screen. "Marcus," Wilson said, his voice very quiet. "Come look at this." Reynolds walked around the desk. He looked at the monitor. There it was. Thomas Jefferson. Status, citizen. Birthplace, Montgomery, Alabama. Service, record verified. Rank, Master Sergeant. Awards, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Good Conduct Medal, ×6. The screen was filled with the undeniable proof of a life lived in service to the United States. Reynolds stared. The confidence drained out of him like water from a cracked cup. He's in the system," Reynolds stammered. "He is the system," Wilson hissed. "He's a decorated war hero, Marcus. You just arrested a Purple Heart recipient in a wheelchair based on an anonymous phone call." Wilson stood up. "Get those cuffs off him, right now." Reynolds fumbled for his keys. His hands were shaking. He unlocked the cuffs. Thomas rubbed his wrists. He looked at Reynolds with eyes that were tired, so incredibly tired. "Can I call my daughter now?" Thomas asked. "Yes, sir," Wilson said immediately. "Here, use the desk phone." Thomas dialed a number from memory. It rang twice. "Sarah," Thomas said. His voice cracked for the first time. "Sarah, baby, I need you. They arrested me at the VA. We are halfway through this story, and the injustice is suffocating. An American hero treated like an enemy in his own country. It makes you wonder, if a Bronze Star doesn't protect you from profiling, what does? If this story is making your blood boil, let me know in the comments. And if you think veterans deserve better, hit that like button. It helps us get this truth out to more people. Sarah Jefferson Williams was not just Thomas's daughter. She was a retired lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force. She was currently a practicing attorney specializing in military law. When she heard her father's voice, shaking, humiliated, something in her snapped. But it was a controlled snap, the cold, precise anger of a strategist. "Where are you, Daddy?" she asked. He told her. "I'm 20 minutes away." She said, "Don't say another word to them. Don't sign anything. I'm coming." Sarah didn't come alone. She called her husband, a former JAG officer. She called a contact at the local news station. She called the regional director of the ACLU. When she walked into the detention center lobby, she looked like a avenging angel in a pantsuit. She found her father sitting in his wheelchair by the vending machines, still wearing his veteran cap. She hugged him, fierce and protective. Then she turned to the desk. "I want the names of the arresting agents," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room. "I want their badge numbers. I want the incident report. And I want the body camera footage preserved immediately." Reynolds and Mitchell were hiding in the back office. They knew the storm had arrived. Thomas was released without charges, obviously. The administrative error excuse was trotted out by a nervous supervisor. Sarah didn't buy it. "This wasn't an error," she told the supervisor. "This was a choice. You chose to target him. You chose to ignore his ID. You chose to humiliate him." They wheeled Thomas out to the car. He was silent. The proud man who had joked with nurses that morning was gone, replaced by a man who looked diminished, fragile. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He kept rubbing his wrists. He told Sarah he didn't want to go back to the VA. He didn't want to wear his hat anymore. "They took my dignity, Sarah," he whispered. "I gave them my leg. I gave them my youth. And they looked at me and saw a criminal." Sarah held his hand. "We're going to get it back, Daddy. We're going to get it all back." The lawsuit was filed 3 weeks later. Jefferson versus United States Department of Homeland Security, et al. It wasn't just a complaint. It was an indictment of a system. Sarah's legal team, bolstered by top civil rights attorneys who had heard the story and lined up to help, laid out the case. They alleged violations of the Fourth Amendment, unreasonable search and seizure, the Fifth Amendment, due process, and the 14th Amendment, equal protection. They sued for false arrest, assault, battery, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The government tried to settle. They offered $250,000. Sarah laughed at them. They offered $750,000. Sarah hung up the phone. "This goes to trial," she told her team. "I want a jury to see the video. I want the world to see what they did to him." The discovery process was brutal for the defense. Sarah's team subpoenaed everything. They got the body camera footage. They got the VA security tapes. They got Reynolds' personnel file, and there it was, the smoking gun. Reynolds had 9 prior complaints, all for racial profiling, all involving elderly minority men, all dismissed by his supervisors as unfounded. He had a pattern, he had a type, and Thomas Jefferson had fit the profile perfectly. The trial began on a rainy Monday in Atlanta. The courtroom was packed. Veterans from all branches of service filled the pews, a sea of caps and jackets. The prosecution played the video on a massive screen. The jury watched Reynolds stride across the lobby. They watched him ignore the ID. They watched him handcuff an 89-year-old man. They heard Thomas's quiet dignity and Reynolds' arrogant barking. When the video ended, the courtroom was so silent you could hear the rain hitting the windows. Thomas took the stand. He didn't need a wheelchair ramp to get to the witness box. He insisted on walking with his cane, wincing with every step, the pain in his leg a physical testament to his service. He told the jury about Korea. He told them about the cold. He told them about the shrapnel. "I fought for a country that said I was equal," Thomas said, tears streaming down his face. "I believed it. Until that day, that young man looked at me and decided I was nothing. He decided my service didn't count. He decided my life didn't matter." Reynolds took the stand. He tried to explain. He talked about suspicious behavior and protecting the border. But under cross-examination, he crumbled. He couldn't explain why he hadn't checked the database. He couldn't explain why he hadn't believed the ID. He was revealed for what he was, a bully with a badge. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, the foreman, a middle-aged woman who looked like a schoolteacher, stood up. Her hands were shaking as she held the verdict form. "We find the defendants liable on all counts," she read. The courtroom erupted. Sarah squeezed her father's hand. Then came the damages. "We award the plaintiff $9.5 million in compensatory damages," the foreman read. A gasp went through the room. "And," she continued, looking directly at Reynolds, "we award $6.5 million in punitive damages." $16 million. It was one of the largest individual civil rights settlements in the history of the federal government. Thomas Jefferson sat in his wheelchair. He closed his eyes. He didn't smile. He just exhaled, a long, deep breath he felt like he had been holding for 2 years. The aftermath was swift and severe. Agent Marcus Reynolds was fired, but it didn't end there. Because of the clear evidence of civil rights violations, the Department of Justice opened a criminal inquiry. He was eventually indicted for deprivation of rights under color of law. Agent Mitchell was suspended and demoted. She testified against Reynolds in the internal investigation, saving her job but ruining her career. The Department of Homeland Security announced a sweeping overhaul of its verification protocols. The Jefferson Rule was implemented. Agents were now required to verify citizenship through the database before detaining anyone at a medical facility. The VA was declared a sensitive zone, requiring supervisor approval for any enforcement action. Thomas Jefferson used the money to start a foundation. The Jefferson Legal Defense Fund provides free legal representation to veterans who have been wrongly detained or discriminated against by law enforcement. He still goes to the VA. But now, when he wheels into the lobby, the staff doesn't just wave. They stand up. They shake his hand. One afternoon, a year after the verdict, Thomas is sitting on his porch. The sun is setting over Atlanta. Sarah is sitting next to him, sipping iced tea. "You did good, Daddy," she says. Thomas touches the brim of his cap. "We did good, baby." We reminded them. Reminded them of what? That this is our country too, Thomas says, and we aren't asking for permission to be here anymore. This story forces us to look in the mirror. We like to think we honor our veterans. We put stickers on our cars. We say, "Thank you for your service." But honor isn't a slogan. Honor is action. Honor is ensuring that a man who bled for us isn't treated like a criminal because of the color of his skin. Thomas Jefferson stood up for himself, even when he couldn't physically stand. He forced the system to bow to justice. So, I have to ask, what would you have done? If you saw that happening in the waiting room, would you have been like Frank, shouting for them to stop? Or would you have looked away? Let me know in the comments. And if you believe that justice should be blind to color but not to character, share this video. The more we talk about these stories, the harder it is for them to happen again. I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe.